Quick note about this video. I originally gave this talk as part of the virtual East Coast RepRap Fest in 2020. The in-person event was canceled due to COVID, so a lot of makers like myself were asked to give presentations online, and I chose for a topic facial recognition, something that was really interesting to me at the time. And it just occurred to me the other day that I hadn't taken my presentation and put it on my YouTube channel. So if you missed it the first time around, here's a trip back in time to VRF 2020, and you can see my talk on facial recognition, 3D printing, and you. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Sink, and I am going to be talking today about facial recognition, 3D printing, and you. And so I've actually got a presentation that we're going to run through, and you should see it now.
Yep, I see it.
All right, great. So this is going to be kind of an exploration. Just a quick bit of background. I've been involved in 3D printing since 2012 or so. And one of the first things that I 3D printed was a scan of my face. And I took a picture of it, and Facebook tagged it as a picture of me. And I was just blown away by that. And I've been kind of playing with this on and off for a couple of years. So I thought this would be a good time to kind of revisit it, especially now that phones come with Face ID. And that was kind of a new challenge for me. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. And we'll start by saying, we want to ask kind of a broad question here, which is, can you beat Face ID with a 3D printed mask? And luckily for everyone, I already found the answer. It's no. Just kidding. It's not yet. This is kind of a complicated thing because just because you haven't done it yet doesn't mean you can't do it in the future. So instead of treating this kind of like a closed project, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned on the process trying to do this. So when you're talking about beating Face ID or talking about any facial recognition system, there are a lot of different sensors that you can think about. And so one of the things I did was kind of posed a couple questions online about what sensors should I pay attention to. And the answers were all over the map. Everything from you need a way to mimic blood flow. You have to check the facial temperature of the person being scanned, the heat signature. And this was useful to some extent, but then there was the best answer I got, which is Apple is obviously pretty tight-lipped about its security technology. And that makes sense, right? If you're in the business of making locks, you probably wouldn't also publish the schematics of those locks too for people to use. So I wanted to focus on a couple of known factors. So I knew that the Face ID is using its the IR camera on the phone to make a digital map of your face. So I chose to ignore everything else, just focus on that. So I had a high-resolution scan done, and then I had that scan printed out. And I learned a lot in the process of doing this and trying to maintain a pretty good balance between high fidelity and printability. So I didn't want a model that was a gigabyte in size. I was looking for something a little bit easier to print. So this brings us to the testing. After I printed it out, I did a couple different incremental levels of testing. And the first one is just the geometry. And then we have the geometry plus some pretty creepy looking eyes. And then we've got a couple of accessories, a level of paint, and then sort of I classified this as level 5. This is beard, hair. This is actually, so this was pretty close to what my hair looked like at the time that I made this. And that is sort of the post-COVID hair. So that
Oh, we're getting a little bit of lag.
These,
oh, you're good now.
Oh, all right. Perfect. So none of these worked. The only one that worked is the model on the left, and that reliably unlocked the phone every time. And I wasn't sure why that was happening. If I took a piece of paper and held it up over the bottom half of my face, it didn't actually do anything. So it was kind of a weird situation. I wasn't sure how to handle this. And one of the pieces of feedback I got was that PLA as a material tends to be IR transmissible. So you can just shoot IR light right through it. So in theory, it's like I wasn't wearing a mask. That might be the case, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. Now, I kept experimenting, and this is where it gets a little bit weird. I can set up Face ID using a 3D printed mask. So on the right, you'll see I actually set my Face ID scan up using a 3D printed scan of myself, and I can unlock the phone with it. So that was kind of interesting. But at the end of the day, the important part is, so how well does it work? Who's fooled? My iPhone camera will automatically identify this as a face, and so will my Canon DSLR. And that's great. That's a really cool experience to see the camera think that it's looking at a person. But to me, the absolute best victory is that if I take a picture of this, Google Photos will automatically tag it as a picture of me. And if I tag, and I've tried it a couple different times in a few different lighting scenarios, so on some level, there's a computer out there that thinks this is me. So to kind of sum this all up, going back to that original idea, I couldn't fully bypass Face ID with a 3D printed mask yet. So I'm still playing around with this, and if this is something that you've done before in the past or you've played around with, shoot me a message on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube. And I'd love to hear your ideas on how this process could work. And if this is something that you could use as a potential bypass. All right. And with 10 seconds to spare, I think that brings us to a wrap.
That was perfect, sir. That was absolutely perfect.